Deciphering the ancient Egyptian language. The ancient Egyptian language remained a secret for about 1,400 years until Champollion came in the year 1022. He revealed its secrets in its state, which is the hieroglyphic banana, but the language of the people itself was not erased from the country during this period, but remained in another form, the axial language. This is because the hieroglyphic, from the conquest of Alexander the Great to Egypt, began to be written in Greek letters in addition to writing it in Egyptian script. After they added 7 demotic wars to it, which had no equivalent in the Greek language, from this era the ancient Egyptian language was called the axial language, meaning Egyptian. The writings circulated in the country were in 3 different forms until the end of the Roman era in Egypt, which were hieroglyphic writing, meaning the traditional writing of the country, and then Greek writing. Then the axillary writing and the hieroglyphic writing disappeared in the late 4th century AD with the disappearance of the Sunnah from the country, and it was no longer the people's writing. As for the Greek language, its use was eliminated immediately after the Arab conquest. While the axillary writing remained the language of the people in some places in Upper Egypt in prayers, worship and schools until the late 17th century. After that, it was restricted to religious prayers that it is fortified with to this day, and only a few people know it. Relatively, from that time we see that the axillary language is a language of a dialect of the Egyptian language that has been preserved for us written in Greek letters. And it has a grammar and a dictionary in Arabic and Greek. In the middle of the 17th century, Father Elizabeth Kircher understood that the axillary language preserves in its teeth the ancient Egyptian language written in Greek letters. He sat and did scientific research in this language, but when he wanted to return the Aktabai language to the Egyptian language, he never succeeded, And he wondered about the Egyptian language. Is it letters or sounds or meanings, and how can it be read? But what we received from the ancients about the Egyptian language is a rare and mysterious definition, and the name itself is hieroglyphic, indicating mystery, because its meaning is sacred writing, as Herodotus and Diodorus Clement of Alexandria, who lived in the late 2nd century AD, mentioned that he saw some people speaking the Egyptian language and writing it in hieroglyphics. Herodotus and after him Diodorus informed us that in Egypt there were 2 types of writing, one of which was sacred writing and only the priests knew it, and the other was demotic. The language of the common people, but the interpretation of these writings remained a mysterious secret until one of Napoleon's soldiers accidentally discovered the Rosetta Stone in the year 1799. What happened was that the French campaign led by Napoleon Bonaparte was not only for military occupation, but also for scientific purposes related to the Egyptian civilization. A group of scholars came with me and they were lucky enough to discover by chance, or one of the artillery officers named Bouchard or Boussard discovered by chance in August 7999. While digging in Rashid Castle, a piece of basalt stone was found engraved with 3 different inscriptions. Their third inscription, which is the lower writing on the stone, was written in Greek. The writing was approved by a royal decree issued by Ptolemaic V in the year 12 AD. The Greek text stated that it was the same written text. In the other 2 scripts, which are hieroglyphic, the sacred writing, and demotic, the popular writing. From here we see that Rashid's thing was written in 2 Egyptian scripts, and thus it contains the secret key to hieroglyphic writing. Because the meanings of all the words engraved on this stone are found in the Greek text, and the first person who tried to decipher this stone was Sylvestre de Sacy in the year 182, and he was an Arabic language scholar. He was trying to write a demotic section, which he thought was because this script was similar to the Arabic script, so he believed that there was a relationship between them. But his efforts and the least of the countries that did not have sex in that it knows the cartouche of Ptolemy. In 1814, the English doctor Thomas Young tried to decipher the language from the hieroglyphic text. He knew from the efforts of his predecessors that royal names, such as Ptolemy, must be placed inside a cartouche. And so he arranged the signs that appeared on the cartouches as letters that represented the word Ptolemy. He actually managed to identify a group of letters that made up the name Ptolemy, but he was unable to identify the exact vowels that made up this name. That's why when he wanted to apply the alphabetical letters that he had extracted incorrectly, he couldn't reach any Abyssinian word that had a similar rhythm. At the time when Dr. Thomas Young was working on this subject, there was a young man named Jean-François Chapelain. He lived from 1790 to 1832. He taught history at the University of Grenoble. He took it upon himself to solve the codes of this language. He was fond of ancient Egyptian history since his early childhood and learned everything that the three ancient eras had left us about this language and the auxiliary language as well. He knew several languages, including Greek. I know from the works of Deciphering and Dr. Young that the Greek proper names. It is supposed to be written in Egyptian alphabetical letters, and on this basis he built the foundation of his research. The rule has been on the path to success since the year 1821. The first thing Champollion did in this field was to research the subject of the differences in ancient Egyptian writings and prove that hieratic writing is an abbreviation of hieroglyphic writing. Thus, the ancient Egyptian script is one, except that it is written in three forms, like the Arabic language. For example, it is written in Ruqay, Nas, and Thuluth. There must be in the Heligopolitan writing, as in the Demotic, signs that have a phonetic and alphabetic value. Champollion also noted, on the other hand, that when he calculated the hieroglyphic signs on the Rosetta Stone, they were more numerous. From the words of the corresponding Greek text, he knew Greek, as we said, and based on this he concluded that every hieroglyphic sign does not represent an idea or a word. On this basis, Champollion began to research the Rosetta Stone cartouche again in 1822. He received a copy of two new cartouches engraved on a small obelisk that had been found in Philae. It was written on the basis of the question presented in Greek to Ptolemy and Cleopatra. Champollion proved that the first of these two cartouches is Ptolemy because it is exactly like the cartouche of the Rosetta Stone, and the second is supposed to be Cleopatra. This is because there are 5 letters shared in both names, Be, Tai, Lim, Vav, and Ele, between Cleopatra and Ptolemy. Well, the reality is that there are 5 similar signs, each in a logical, tangible position. In both hieroglyphic names, on the other hand, we do not find the letter S in the name of the queen, while there are new signs in it, which are Octave, Aleph, and Re, and it does not contain King Ptolemy. In conclusion, since there are similar signs in these two names and they are considered to express the same sound, there must be specific vowels. Champollion preferred, for a few weeks, to apply the alphabetical letters that we find to all the names of the Ptolemies and the Caesars, which was present in the book Description of Egypt, which the French campaign had included, and he reached the site of 79 new cartridges, through which he reached the knowledge of new letters of the alphabet. Thus, he was able to create a table of phonetic letters. He proved this amazing result in a letter he sent to Dassey, the permanent secretary of the French Academy, on September 27, 1822, in which he announced that hieroglyphic cartouches could be read. But at that moment he was only able to read the names of the Greek kings and the Roman emperors, and now how can he solve the symbols of writing in the Pharaonic era, which contain the same phonetic elements? He had announced in his speech between the specifications of Nudja and Reef Red, the cartouche of the pharaohs, as I see the cartouche of the Ptolemies and the remains of the latter. In fact, Chamville had received a copy of the cartridges from a temple older than the Greek temples. In one of the cartouches at the end of the name, you can see the two curved bars that are the sign of the letter S, and each of them represents the last letter of the name of Ptolemy. The one on the Rosetta Stone is the letter S and S. At the beginning of the cartouche we see the round plant, which symbolized the sun and is read in Greek Naxilic texts as a plant. As for the middle sign, which is the sign of maize, Champollion saw it on something Rashid as it is written and followed by the letter Sin, and it corresponds in the incantations to the day of birth. To the king, I concluded that this word is not the letter al-Shari, but rather corresponds to the Aktab word mes, meaning to give birth, or mes, meaning a child. Champollion combined these elements together and became Ramses. This name was mentioned by Menathon and Tacitus, although he was unable to read the name, but also understand its meaning and translation. According to the axillary, it means the one born of Ra, or Ra begets him, or the son of Ra. And Saptset means, from his method, immediately reading the second cartouche because he found in it that the ibis bird symbolized Thoth. And so the second cartridge must be pierced by Thoth Mes or Thoth Mes, meaning mess. In fact, Manetho mentioned to us the name of the pharaoh, Thutmose, and according to the Coptic language, he interpreted Thoth as meaning Thoth gives birth to him, meaning the son of Thoth, meaning also Thoth represents. From that time, Champollion's genius fascinated him because the writing on the pharaonic monuments before the Greco-Roman era was not a single alphabetical letter like the cartouches of Timoso and Cleopatra. And then it was not symbolic signs in a party as people thought before, but in reality it contained one symbolic or pictorial sign like Ra and Thoth and two vocal signs. It may sometimes be composed of a syllable like ms and sometimes of letters of the alphabet like sin. The truth is that the mistake that Champollion's ancestors made, and which he himself shared with them until the day he arrived at this truth, was their belief that hieroglyphic writing is sometimes entirely pictorial or partially phonetic. But the reality is that the writing system is, as we have seen, a complex system, meaning pictorial, symbolic, and phonetic writing, and we see this in one sentence, or even in one word sometimes, as we have seen before and explained before. Then Champollion came forward and solved the symbols, and he hit them with a correct arrow, as we say, and he put a dictionary and a grammar for them. He came to Egypt and made a scientific trip there and wrote a book in which he collected many Egyptian inscriptions and called it Antiquities of Egypt and the Land of Nubia. When he returned to his country, he was appointed professor of Egyptian antiquities, which was created specifically for him at the College of France. But he had been exhausted by the fatigue of the last 10 years of the arduous research, and this had ruined his health, so he died on March 4, 1932. He left behind his grammatia and his commas in the ancient Egyptian language. After Champollion established the basic rules for deciphering the language, scholars of different nationalities came after him. They made great progress in the study of language and archaeology. They did not stop at studying the apparent, but rather they carried out excavations that revealed many inscriptions and funerary monuments, which helped in understanding and depicting the history and civilization. Despite the passage of more than a century, these efforts are still progressing day by day, and these excavations and research continue to provide us with new information every day that increases our knowledge of the history of Egypt. It illuminates many of the mysteries of our era, and it is likely to correct many of the errors and theories that were brought by previous scientists. Now let us take a quick look at the efforts of scholars of different nationalities whose research and work had an excellent impact on the progress of Egyptian archaeology. One of the French scholars who appeared after Champollion was the scholar Emmanuel de Rogue. He transferred many inscriptions and began to write an organized research on the history of Egypt, based on the inscriptions of its influence. Then he also wrote a valuable book on the geography of the seafront. During his time, the great scholar Merida appeared, who is credited with establishing the Egyptian Museum and the Egyptian Antiquities Service in 1857. He was the first to hold large-scale exhibitions. He discovered temples and cemeteries, and one of his most important research centers was the Saqqara area. He was the first to discover the tomb of Apis, which is known as the Serapeum. Many of the tombs of the ancient state, and the French scientists at that time were very active, so many of them appeared, meaning many people appeared, and he established, alongside the Egyptian Antiquities Authority, the French Institute for Oriental Antiquities and Cairo's
Since its
establishment, the institute has published many valuable research papers and the results of its continuous excavation in many parts of Egypt. The most prominent of these scholars is also the famous Jam Mas Peru, who took over the Egyptian department. He left us hundreds of his researches in language and archaeology, especially in the Saqqara area. He opened some of the pyramids of the kings of the 5th and 6th dynasties and found the walls of the burial chambers covered with religious inscriptions known as the pyramid texts. I will mention it in another place, and after him came many French Germans, such as Lauret, Demergen, Lecoux, Moret, and Chessina, and then 2 other Germans, the Germans. The first German scientist to appear and do great work was Richard Lepsius, who came to Egypt at the head of a mission from 1842 to 1845. To study its antiquities at the expense of the King of Prussia at that time, the mission conducted an organized scientific study of the antiquities of Egypt and Nubia. She did not limit herself to transferring the inscriptions only, but her research required a lot of excavation in Egypt and Nubia, and the results of her research appeared in the immortal book known as Lepsius Dunkmiller. It was published in 149 AH with 12 parts and is still a reference for anyone working in antiquities. After Lepidus, another star scientist, Henri Broch, succeeded in reading the Demotic script in 1849. After Lepsius and his work, which is Lepsius Dinkelmiller, we saw Henry Burkish, who succeeded in the year 1149 in reading the Demotic script. He surpassed most scholars in his intelligence and activity, and he deserved to be placed on the level of Champollion in the amount of his production and the establishment of symbols for the ancient Egyptian language. A second dictionary of geography in Egypt and a dictionary of Demotic Adramia came after him in the year 1078 by Adolphe Arman, the scholar Adolphe Arman. His greatest work was to compile a dictionary of the ancient Egyptian language. And also for all the Egyptian texts that were missing, he sought the help of some of his students in translating them and extracted from them a dictionary of the Egyptian language. He also wrote a valuable book about Egyptian life, which is considered one of the best things that has been published for people on this subject. A number of scholars who had a global revolution graduated under his supervision. We would like to mention, for example, Professor Stadrov, who wrote an agrammatical text for the Abachan language, and Professor Zita, who collected and translated the texts of the pyramids. And thus he became the only mayor in the whole world in its interpretation, meaning, and Professor Juncker who is distinguished by his knowledge of the Egyptian text, and all its families with a knowledge that no one knows about, and he specialized in the Ptolemaic era until he became the only reference in it. And of course, Professor Spiegelberg who specialized in democracy, and Professor Schaefer who is one of the best scholars in the science of families and Egyptian art. Thirdly, the English scholars have done a great deal in the revival of the ancient Egyptian language and its impact. We mention in particular the scholar Birch and Watkinson. The author of the book Customs and Morals in Ancient Egypt, then Professor Graves the author of the many books, meaning the many books in demotic and translations of the ancient Egyptian text. And Professor Gardner who wrote a book in which he wrote the grammar of the ancient Egyptian language is considered the greatest mayor now in this regard, meaning the greatest book specializing in the grammar of the Heron in it. And also Saad with his many researches on the progress of reading the hieratic script, and Professor Gunn, who wrote a valuable book in which he Arabiized the ancient Egyptian language, and finally Professor Newberry, even with accurate researches in archaeology. And besides these scholars, other scholars of other nationalities appeared who helped in the plunder of this language, including Professor John Schaff, the Russian, who conducted many researches and translated many Egyptian texts, and the American Reisner, who carried out the organization's excavation in Egypt and Nubia from 1903. And to this day, the date of writing Salim Hassan's encyclopedia remains. He was excavating in the Giza area west of the Great Pyramid. And among his most important works is his book on Menka and She Who Built the Third Pyramid. As for the greatest scholar who served ancient Egyptian history, he is Professor Breasted, who collected all the historical texts and extracted from them a history of Egypt that is considered, despite its antiquity, one of the greatest references in ancient Egyptian history until the Persian conquest. As for the Egyptians, they did not study the language of their country and its influence except from someone close to them and on the instructions of the late Ahmed Pasha Kamal, who wrote several books in French and Arabic. Then came the modern Egyptian Renaissance, and some of its sons began digging and excavating and writing some books. An institute for the study of Egyptian antiquities was established in Egypt at the university 10 years ago, and much good is expected from it. Missions were sent to study the Egyptian language, and all hope was pinned on the Egyptian youth, who would make an impact. He captured their country and wrote books about it and showed the greatness of Egypt and its ancient glory. They are the people most deserving of this great honor. Of course, Salim Hassan himself, the writer of the encyclopedia, is considered one of the scholars who had a great role. The great scholar Bakir and Gergis Matta, and finally many Egyptian and Arab scholars. And finally, at the head of them is the Honorable Professor Dr. Abdul Halim Nuridi.